Oh, good afternoon. I hope to be able to say at the end of this that we've saved the best till last. We had a great keynote earlier about VR from Jaunt, and we're now going to explore what VR means for cinema and for audiences. And first up, we've got Dave McKimmie from Fox, who's going to tell us all about their experiences with the Barco escape system, and we're then going to hear from Ted Schilowitz, and then we're going to have a Q&A including Scott and Arthur from Jaunt. So, David.
Hello. Is everyone awake? My name is David McKimmie. I'm an independent post-production supervisor at 20th Century Fox. I've been there for 14 years, in the last 10 years as a supervisor. So I'm very happy to be here today. I've had a great time the last couple of days. I think it's been a really great couple of days, and I want to thank everyone at SMPTE for putting it together. I loved the quote this morning from George Lucas saying that he's not a technology guy. If he's not a technology guy, then I'm the dancing monkey. So I'm going to do my little dance for you. So I decided to start the slideshow with a clever pun. The format that we're going to talk about wasn't christened Escape until a little bit into the process, but, always start. Let's see. Okay, so my boss, Ted Galliano, some of you may know, gave me a call and said that Barco has a new immersive picture format that is not 3D. I, of course, said, are you sure? Because it sounds like 3D to me, because the keyword immersive. And he said, no, I already told you that, but it is exclusive to theaters, and Barco is going to pay to create content, which is always what we like to hear. It might be a good way to get people back into the movie theaters, especially big houses, and we think that your movie's right for it. I was working on a movie called The Maze Runner with a director called Wes Ball. He said, call our futurist, Ted Schilowitz, he'll tell you all about it. I, of course, was surprised that we had a futurist, but I was talking to him, and then suddenly the phone rang, and it was Ted Schilowitz asking me if I'd spoken to Ted and to talk to me about this great new immersive screening format. So at the time, we didn't really have a name for it. It wasn't called Escape, so it was codenamed Goosebumps at that point. And all I knew about it is that it was a way to put 2 additional screens of content. So we'd shot our movie, regular movie, 239, front, just like every other movie in the world. And the challenge was to have 2 other screens. So kind of like we have here, and the way it's described to me, because I had no way of seeing it, was a screen on the front, 2 screens on the side, in a box, basically. So we spoke to our friends at Method. Those were the people doing the visual effects for the movie. And we cut together a 23-second sequence with 3 shots, and asked for these 3 shots on the 2 new screens, and could they do it for us? And of course, they did. And this is what we got back from them. Logan Bright, our visual effects editor, mocked this up in the Avid. Obviously, you can't really show 3 screens on one plane, so this is just our way of kind of simulating the experience in the theater from middle, looking at the front screen and the 2 side screens. And this is what we got back from our friends at Method. So that's it. It's exciting stuff. That took a long time. Well done, everyone. Well done, Method. There was no white paper for Escape at this point because we'd only spoken about it in very general terms. So this is the closest thing there is to a white paper for that first incarnation, which is a sheet of yellow legal paper. And this is what I put together to try to explain to the DI vendor what it was we were trying to do, taking the 239 2K center image and lining up pixel for pixel a 178 on the side of those images. Of course, it was very confusing. They didn't really understand because they couldn't see it in action. There was no theater to go see this in. So Logan Bright, our visual effects editor, who's much more competent than me, put together this nice little graphic kind of showing them what we wanted to do. From there, we kind of, we got the shots in, we put them through DI, and this is a simulated auditorium. It's not real, obviously. And this is what it looked like when we went to CinemaCon. This is the spec from CinemaCon in April through about July of last year, and this is the actual spec that we went to CinemaCon with. So the first iteration of Barco Escape, as it became to be known by then, was 3 DPX sequences from a 7th Sense media player. So there's no DCP, it was all DPX sequences. The front screen was a regular 2K DCI compliant projector. It was Rec. 709, 14-foot Lamberts. It was on a regular screen, whatever was in the room, white 1.2 gain. The left and the right were custom installed, and the first installation, I think, was at the Howard Hughes Center, and the screens were at a 95-degree angle. So like I said, it's just like being in a big box. It was 1920 by 1080, so just regular HD resolution on the sides, Rec. 709, slightly dimmer because the light contamination bouncing around these three screens is pretty severe. So, because the peripheral vision on the sides is a little bit more light sensitive in the center, we decided to come down to 10-foot Lamberts. So that was the first spec that we did, and that was really a working set. We knew that wasn't really going to work for the theatrical release, which was coming up soon, but that's what we had just to get stuff on the screen at CinemaCon. So everyone was pretty excited after we finished CinemaCon, and 20th Century Fox thought it was worth pursuing. We were very happy with it. Method did a great job, but when we tried to figure out what we'd like to do for the rest of the movie, Barco wanted about 10 minutes of content. It was going to be pretty expensive. So at this point, we went back to our futurist, Ted Schilowitz, and told him the price we thought it might be. And he put his thinking cap on, and he called his friends and formed a company, a couple of guys, Jason Chen and Simon Lombardo, called The Box Creative. This is The Box Creative's render trailer, the Silver Draft trailer, at the Henson Studios in Hollywood. The Box Creative is basically two guys and a bunch of compositors and artists. And what they did was, we'll actually go to the next slide to tell you what they did. By the time we decided that we were going to move forward with this, we had about 12, 13 weeks. So they really had 9 weeks after they got going. We spent about 3 weeks meeting with the director, trying to figure out what we wanted to do, which content we wanted to target, because we couldn't do the whole movie, but we figured we'd get about 10 minutes. So we decided on 3 sections. The very beginning of the movie, because we knew what that was. It had been prevised almost to the frame by our director. The first night in the maze, and the maze rearranged section, which was the biggest, most kind of exciting sequence in the movie. So that was a little bit of work, trying to kind of earmark those, identify sections, and then requesting the assets from the visual effects vendor. Because it takes a little bit of a time to get that from the visual effects vendor, to import them, to work with them in the game engines, which is one of the kind of novel ways of working which made this possible. I'll get into that in a second. But to work with those and then start prepping them. So 4 weeks really just to get going, get the assets delivered, test the deliveries, unarchive them, get them ready, start placing them in space, in the 3D space in the game engine. And then 9 weeks to finish the entire project. So no pressure, Box Creative. And this is one of the sequences they came up with. So as you'll see, none of this stuff off to the left or right existed. This is all a matter of talking to the director and figuring out what do we think is there. And then the surprising thing, I think, for our friends at the Box Creative was how much we actually shot. I think they were thinking that everything was virtual and that we were running on green screen. That's not the case. We were running on an old abandoned parking lot, and so we didn't have those assets off to the left or right. So they needed to find and create textures on the floor that kind of matched the center, which is no mean feat, and they did a really great job. That goes for all the sections. So the workflow basically was acquiring the assets, processing them, putting in additional stuff, matching the floors, matching the skies. It's a lot of work. And filling in the blanks from what we actually shot. Not just the digital elements that we got as visual effects, but all the practical stuff that we shot. Visual effects reviews was tricky because our director was trying to finish his movie. So he wasn't around for a lot of this stuff. So quite often it was me and Simon and Jason and Ted in my boss's living room, which was, as you'll see here, which is where we're all sitting. It's kind of a dark slide, but he had a makeshift escape set up in his living room that he let us use. It was very sweet of him. And then so reviews with me, the president of Post, my boss Ted, our director on occasion, and Fox Visual Effects Department. Obviously, we couldn't get our director into our makeshift escape theater very often, so basically what we did was we rendered this stuff out as one giant widescreen QuickTime, which is how he saw stuff and how you saw stuff just a moment ago. So once they finished their work, we needed to get that into our DI house because, as you'll see, we could never really get this stuff to take a look at in a escape environment because there was only one down at the Howard Hughes Center, and we knew that the stuff didn't match. The Box Creative did a really good job of matching assets, but as you can see, it's really not a clear match. So there's no DI environment that's built for this format yet. We didn't build it because it came to us so late. So what we did was we just had to put the shots up next to each other and correct them as best that we could from scene to scene. Bunch of secondary windows to make sure the elements match when they crossed the frame from the center to the escape screens. And then realignment, because even though the visual effects vendor, the Box Creative, did a great job, we'd get stuff back and it didn't quite match up. You'll see the center screen here and the side don't match. So we'd get this stuff and have to kind of realign them in the DI before we rendered that stuff out. So the trickiest part, I think, for the Box Creative was taking these assets. I think they thought there'd be more assets than there were. Matching the stuff to the physical stuff that we shot that they had to then create or find library assets for, and then the process of getting it ready for the theater. So by the time it actually got to the theater, the other challenge for our DI house is the spec changed continuously because obviously Barco was trying to find ways to make this a little bit easier and less cumbersome and a more technically proficient way of doing it and more secure way of doing it. So the spec when we got to release this thing in September of last year was a regular DCP on the front screen. That's just regular DCP. It was a 4K, but it was probably a 2K output in most of these theaters. In P3, 14-foot Lamberts, regular screen, 1.4 gain normally. The custom installs that we had, again, were a negative gain screen on the sides because obviously that is a way to mitigate the light bounce. And then the same thing as we had for the earlier displays, which is from a 7-sense media server, slave to the timecode output of the digital cinema server. 10-bit DPX, exactly the same as last time. So the challenge for us really was making the Rec 709 match the P3. And, eFilm did a really great job with that. It was so successful and everyone was so happy with it. Our friends at Barco said, well, why don't we do more footage for the Belgian release? And I said, well, that's going to be tricky. And they said, well, you've got an extra 2 weeks. What's the problem? So we actually did a couple of sections. There's three dream sequences in the movie. And the guys at the Box Creative kind of spoke to our montage vendor, our design house, and they both came up with some ideas. The Box created that stuff and executed it and just basically came up with really kind of dream-like stuff. The dream sequences show how disoriented our main character is, having these flashbacks to his former life. So it's really to kind of add to that experience psychologically. And there were 3 of those, and they got added to the movie and took our total content up to about 10 minutes for the international release. The challenge was to tell the 7th-sense server when to click on and off. And we could never come up with those numbers until we were in the room because there was no environment to check that stuff until we were in the room the morning of the performance. So it was a little scary sometimes. And the Barco guys have nerves of steel. Robert Joseph is so smart and he's so good at what he does. And they'd always be ready. And I, of course, would be panicking and they'd do a great job and knock it out the park. The trickiest thing for us was when we did the international DCPs, the time code is different for the Flemish subtitled version and the French dubbed version because there's different stuff for the heads of the DCPs. So using my, I took my last math class at age 15. So I took my limited math abilities and just tried to figure out exactly where they were kind of to the frame if I could and put together this little chart for them where each of the sequences will click on and off. And again, they didn't get to test this until the day they went into the theaters and miraculously it all worked to the frames. That was great news. So the tricky thing is this is new technology. We couldn't use the same method that we do for everything else for visual effects because it was just too expensive. The Box Creative used game engine technology, which obviously we all know is visual effects been trying to do it for a long time, sometimes with mixed results. But we did a lot of really creative work, and I just wanted to give you a little price comparison. So phase 1, to remind you, method, was taking 3 shots and took about 6 weeks. The box creative had 8.5 minutes, 90 shots, and 3 additional montage sequences kind of thrown in for fun. And they had 9 weeks, and the price tag was about $200,000 from Method for 3 shots, about $600,000 for the box creative. So that's a big, big price differential. You can't really directly compare these completely because, with Method, there's a tax credit involved, and with the box creative, we did leverage some assets that Ted Schilowitz was able to bring to the table. So the render truck, I think, was either a freebie or was some beautiful synergistic relationship we were able to take advantage of, and some other kind of assets. But obviously that's a big, big difference, 90 shots for $600K. And that's just a matter of working a different way, working a smarter way, and having a really kind of nimble, fleet-of-foot crew. The spec changed again. So the movie was out and everyone was happy, and then I get a call that we're going to be doing a special screening at CineQuest, which is up in the Bay Area in February of this year. And now there is an all DCP solution, which obviously made us very happy. We love digital cinema because it's completely secure. It makes me nervous when we do a DPX sequence because it's, of course, eminently piratable. But the new spec for Escape as of February this year is an all DCP solution. So you can see it's really straightforward now. It's all 2K. It's all P3, which makes my life a whole lot easier. We did not re-render out the side screens. We just took the DPX sequences. We added black frames to the side so we can spit out a new sequence that we just put straight into a DCP. The spec also changed a little bit from the first installation. You remember I said it was about 95 degrees. 95 degrees, you have all kinds of light bounce and contamination. By the time they got to the 5th installation, I think they realized the optimum angle was a little bit wider. So the last installation to go in was 110 degrees. So that's how we got from an idea into the multiplex. And then just for me, my job is always to A, get it done, but then also to annoy the engineers by trying to make it better and quicker and smarter and faster. So thinking about the future of this format, the question is, will there be more auditoriums? I think so. There's currently 5. There's 2 in California. There's 1 in Illinois, 1 in Texas. There's 2 internationally. There are plans to add more screens, and Barco's working on that as fast as they can. More product, of course, because it doesn't matter if you've got the screens if nobody's making the product. Ours is a visual effects movie, is very kind of highly intricate and hard. There's plans for concert footage, Tony Bennett and Lady Gaga. I don't know when that's being released, but it's already in the can. They're very excited about that. Other studios are working as hard as they can, I believe, to put some stuff together. And Fox was very excited about the numbers for the Escape theaters, and was so excited we are doing more sections of the sequel to Maze Runner, The Scorched Trials, which is in post-production right now. I'm sure you'll all be lining up. You can probably pre-buy your tickets, I'm sure, in August. It'll be coming out in September, so you'll be excited about that. Take the kids, they'll love it. Let's see, better picture. Well, that's the thing that I worry about, and I try to optimize as best we can. The first installations, as I said, were at 92, 95 degrees. They're getting smarter. The tricky thing for that is light contamination. The intra-screen contrast ratio, the first time we tested in the first installation, was about a contrast ratio of 10 to 1, as opposed to the DCI spec of 100 to 1. So that doesn't make me happy. It means that the blacks are a little milky. Nobody noticed, nobody complained. The Escape website has a bunch of people extolling how magnificent it looked, and everyone's very happy, but obviously we want to do better. So we're trying to figure out ways to do that. It's possible that we could be looking at louvered screens like the first, the old days of Cinerama. That's one of the solutions they had to exactly the same problem. It could be that we stretch these screens out even further. There's talk about rear projection screens in specifically designed auditoriums, light emitting screens. There's no reason necessarily why a theatrical experience should be reflected. So that's one of the things that I believe everyone's talking about as well. And then the other thing too, what happens to this format in the future? At the moment, as you saw from the slides, the examples, it's one screen with 2 screens off to the side, left or right, and a narrow border in between. To make it a really immersive experience, should it be borders? Should it be curved? Should it be one giant screen? I don't know. I don't think anyone does. That's one of the processes of discovery we've had in the last year, and I'm sure Ted will talk about that too. The biggest thing for us, though, is this a different way of working? For a big visual effects movie, and most of our studio movies are visual effects movies, there's a compartmentalization of the way people work. So we figure out the cheapest way to do a shot. That normally means a 2D visual effects asset on the front, or sometimes 3D, if there's a scene or sequence or setup that can be built that makes it economical to do so. We don't have the luxury of knowing we're going to make 7 Harry Potter movies, even though there's a bunch of Maze Runner books and Scorch Trial books. We don't know if the first one will take off. So we couldn't build all that stuff. Frankly, the stuff that appears in the first movie doesn't feature in the second movie. That's a spoiler, but if you've read the books, you'd know that. So we didn't have the luxury of building all these assets and amortizing them over 8 movies. So the question is, if we are going to be doing this multi-screen format, or any kind of big immersive format, or any kind of virtual reality experience, or any kind of game where we use the same assets from the front screen, the theatrical on the iPad game or the Xbox game, you have to start thinking about the movie holistically, because you'll build things differently. Instead of just doing the cheapest possible way for one screen and throw it away and start again with a game experience and build those assets and throw them away, and then start building them again a third time for the Xbox game and throw that away, and then starting over with the virtual reality experience, it might make sense to think about it differently, a little bit more holistically, and kind of think about how you amortize those costs or spread them across different divisions. That's a bit of a challenge for us. Our business model is not set up for that, but we're definitely trying to think about ways to go about it smarter. And then other ways is we came up with a new way of making visual effects shots. And as you saw, we brought the price down a lot. So the question is this new way of creating visual effects in a game engine, now that game engines are so good, we actually changed game engines halfway through this, because the first game engine we were using wasn't able to render out stuff that we wanted, that I'd asked for, like beveled edges and things like that. So they found another game engine that could and fed those assets in. But now that we're getting so good at that stuff, can we use game engine technology for 30% of shots in the movie, 50%, 80%? I don't know. But certainly it's changing the way we think about visual effects too. And of course, we're always worried about the bottom line. And of course, if we really are creating this stuff that we can use across different platforms, that kind of enables virtual reality, which is, of course, why we're here at this session. But it kind of brings to mind different, maybe smarter ways of working. And of course, this sounds unfamiliar and scary. It's a disruptive technology, and that's something we talk about a lot, and we get very excited because it makes us feel like bad boys. But yes, it is, and it's nothing to be afraid of, and it's something that will make us all better and faster, and hopefully it'll kind of make us all better at what we do. And I know I've come to the end of my PowerPoint, but I just wanted to say really, really quickly thank you to a few people, because it was a big undertaking. It was a really hard undertaking. And Ted Schilowitz, who came to us as our Futurist, he's a smart guy. He's a great guy to work with. Wes Ball, our director on the movie, kind of just let us go ahead and play and have as much fun as we wanted. My cutting room, Dan, PJ, and Logan, they were great. Method, our first vendor, did a great job. The Box Creative, Jason and Simon. eFilm, Matt Tomlinson, Lone Fan, and Elodie did a great job embracing this. We didn't know how it was going to work, and they kind of helped us find our way. The guys at Barco, especially Robert Joseph, and then Ted Galliano, and all the guys at Fox Post, who are real smarty pants and really fun to work with. So that's my little dog and pony about the escape format. Thanks very much. And now, the guy you've been waiting for, 20th Century Fox Futurist, Mr. Ted Schilowitz.
Hey, that was great. Oh, I have a mic, so I don't think I need to stand there. Hi, everybody. So that was terrific as far as I was concerned. Highly comprehensive, so you've gotten a pretty good sense of some of the technicalities and what we've been working on. It's obviously a team effort, right? It matters when you have people that are forward-thinking, that are willing to take risks. And as we talk about this project, this is an exploration. It is a journey. We know we are not anywhere close to the end of this journey, as Dave referred to, with all the different challenges and tests and things that worked out. And he covered sort of all of the technicalities so well that I don't really need to spend any more time doing that. It's pretty fantastic, Dave. So what I'd like to do is just show you a quick little video that we put together that will kind of encapsulate some of the excitement and feeling of what this project is. And then I believe we're going to do a panel discussion, and I'll also talk a little bit about the blending of this world of the panoramic cinema of what we call Barco Escape and virtual reality, which by its very nature is panoramic and immersive. So let's take a look at this quick little video that I brought, and then I'll come back up and talk a little bit more.
I think the most important thing about Barco Escape is that it pushes the boundaries of cinema.
How can the in-cinema experience evolve and get better and offer more to the moviegoer than exists now?
It is the ultimate example of film as attraction.
Movies have roughly the same viewing experience for about 100 years.
Once you've seen escape content, non-escape content feels a little small.
What we started to work on at Barco is asking a question of, can we break out of that rectangle?
It's a really great way to bring people back to the theater. And I feel like this is something that everyone can go see and enjoy. I really hope more films are made this way in the future.
It's like you're in a concert. There's that freedom there to make your experience what it is.
People are making more and more choices to just stay home and watch a movie as opposed to go out and watch a movie. So a big part of what this Barco Escape is all about is creating that added level of excitement.
They want more. They want to see more.
You can't create this kind of immersive new world feeling at home. That was a very moving moment for me to see all three screens come together.
It opens up a whole new platform for filmmakers to tell stories. They have 3 independent screens that they can either work with in unison or work with independently.
You know, they say there's 3 sides to every story. You literally get 3 sides to every story.
Immersive.
Immersive. Immersive.
Immersive.
Immersive.
Immersive.
Immersive.
You don't just go to the movies, you go into the movies. Welcome to Barco Escape. So that gives you a little taste of what it feels like. Now, if I'd have known that we were going to put 3 screens together, I'd have said, you know what, let's put these closer together. I would have actually brought it right here and shown it to you. But there, as Dave mentioned, when we did our first experiment with the Maze Runner, there were 5 cinemas in the US and 2 in Europe. So the economic dynamic of how do we actually achieve what we wanted to achieve when we only had this many cinemas for our first experiment was something where it was all about, invention is the mother of, or necessity, right? In terms of putting together a new way of thinking to create the side screen content that allowed us to stay within the reasonable budget that we wanted for the first experiment. Now, with the success of that under our belt, we're looking at a much bigger footprint of the theaters all around the world and more experimentation with the angles and the screen formulations. It's really like just a big chemistry that we keep mixing and turning until we feel like we've got it. And we'd be the first to tell you, we don't quite have it yet, but we're getting there, and we watch what audiences react to, and the exit polls told us that they were really interested in it and they really wanted more. So that gave us enough sort of impetus to say, let's keep driving it and let's keep going. My world is relatively interesting because I live in two worlds at the same time. So I'm the Futurist at 20th Century Fox, which is a made-up title for a made-up job, and I'm the CinemaVanelist at Barco, which is a made-up title for a made-up job. So I have a lot of fun experimenting with the future, and it's a bit like playing inside baseball on two teams, because here I'm working with Fox and bringing projects back and forth, and we're able to share a lot of stuff very quickly because of that. But Fox is not the only one doing this now. After the success of Maze Runner, we're driving with a number of major studios, and I think you're going to see announcements in the coming weeks based on that and where it's going. And there's a lot of people that see this because a lot of people know that you cannot just stay where we have stayed within the world of cinema and expect it to succeed in the future. You have to experiment, you have to be bold, and you have to take some risks. So that's really all I wanted to say. I know there was going to be a panel discussion, and we're going to talk a little more. I want to mention, because I know a lot of you are here to talk about virtual reality as well, where the two sort of intersect, right? So when you see that little clip behind you, and you get a chance to see it in the theater, for those of you that have seen the Maze Runner in the theater, it is often referred to, Barco Escape, as sort of the bricks and mortar version of virtual reality, because you are essentially creating in a local theater, a local multiplex, the idea of immersive cinema, the idea of bringing a little bit of a theme park style experience and not have to actually go to a theme park, to just go to your local movie theater. Virtual reality does that as well with a head-mounted display, and what we did on the Barco side and the Fox side is, as we started to experiment with that, we got very excited about that, and we decided not to take a timid stance from an exhibitor standpoint about showing what could be done. We took a very bold stance, and we actually ported what you saw with that immersive cinema experience into virtual reality, into the Oculus and into the Gear VR, and it's actually part of the launch material, some short clips of Maze Runner and Wes's short film called Ruin, so people could actually see what it's like to go to an immersive cinema. The idea for us was, don't try and bury your head in the sand about new technology. Figure out a way to embrace it, use it, drive it, and be a part of the story. And that's what we're doing on the Fox side and the Barco side. So that's a little taste of what we're doing, and there'll be a lot more coming from everyone else that comes up. So thank you.
Okay, so we're running a little bit late, but I'm sure you'll all be interested to hear what we've got to talk about now. So indulge us. I know it's beer o'clock, and many of you are thinking about the bar, but this will be interesting. So the first question I want to ask, on one hand we have the Barco Escape experience, which is traditional screens, projection. On the other hand, we have the VR, AR experience, which is about the individual. Can these two worlds intersect?
Sure, absolutely. They already are. We're already doing it every day. Looking at, so I'm on the board of Jaunt with Scott and Arthur, and we talk about the fact that if you're going to shoot it for this, you might as well shoot it for this if you can, with, of course, those restrictions and limitations and understanding that. But the new camera technology that's being applied to virtual reality can also be applied into the idea of immersive cinema.
What's your take on it?
Yeah, I mean, there's already some experiments in VR cinema. When you get the Oculus, the Gear VR, for example, it comes with the cinema app, and you can literally go to, a big screen cinema while you're flying at, 30,000 feet in the airplane. And it's a surprisingly compelling experience. The one issue with it is, though, that the movie theater is empty. There's empty chairs next to you, and they're beautifully lit, and the screen light reflects on the chairs, and you can actually replace the whole cinema with a cinema on the moon, if you like. But the lack of people makes it sort of a very, lonely experience. So what you really want is to see your friends sitting next to you, and that's kind of the next step to make, cinema more social, where I'm flying at 30,000 feet, Ted is sitting next to me, and he's in his office, and my wife's at home, and we're all in the theater watching the same movie. That would be a great experience, and that's going to come someday.
I'd be curious, by a show of hands, who's worn a Gear VR or an Oculus in here? Okay, about half. Who's worn it on an airplane? Just me? You guys, not yet? So I have actually worn it on an airplane many times. I have watched an entire 2-hour movie on an airplane in the virtual cinema and enjoyed it immensely.
No motion sickness?
No motion sickness. But I live in VR a lot, so I've got pretty good VR sea legs. You know, you start to develop a threshold for tolerance to it. I didn't have any motion sickness on the flights that I've done so far, but I wouldn't preclude that from ever happening, though. It might happen.
What do you think?
Well, I mean, if we're shooting for this, and we can shoot for this, especially now we have these big sensors and 6K images, which are not that hard to acquire and not that hard to process. We certainly work with them all the time. One of the tests we did when we think about Escape, if we shoot an Escape, do we have 3 cameras? Do we have a 3-camera array? In which case, we've got to clear, you know, the medics and the craft service guy from here, or do we just shoot with 1 camera with a giant sensor and divide up that image into 3? And we did some tests for a couple of Fox movies, and they worked really well.
It's okay, yeah.
So, I mean, in terms of virtual reality, I'm certainly not an expert. That's not my job. But I think a lot of what we do can feed into it, for sure.
So, Scott, you were talking earlier about how much live content is currently used in VR, and when people might perceive that actually it would all be computer graphics. Is there a big difference right now with VR between the amount of stuff that's shot live compared to VFX in a movie, and do you see that changing?
Well, I think there's a great principle in cinematic VR right now. Again, just to set the playing field, what I mean by cinematic VR is something that is completely 360 by 180. In other words, wherever you look, you'll have something to see, but also that's stereoscopic, and that also has a form of an immersive sound field that comes at you from all the sources you would expect in the real world, right? So this principle that what's old is new again, Arthur had some great slides about what passed for virtual reality was an environment in the past that made you feel like everything was there, but of course, 100, 150 years ago, there were no visual effects. There were just props, right? Real things. And also a very good use of light. And I think those principles are exactly what we need to think about when we talk about the new language of this medium. It's the use of light and sound that will help give you direction. And when we talk about visual effects, there's been, and I love visual effects as much as the next person, but there's been this sort of need or desire to move away from the ultra-precise nature of the pixels. And now we have the ability in virtual reality to start working with real things again, which has kind of lost favor over the last 10, 15 years. But I think the principle of having real objects, real practically built effects, things that are shot in camera, as they say, you get your physics for free. Everything around you has natural weight because it's real. And I think that when you take advantage of the fact that you have shorter form content right now, all those things combined, light, sound, and real things, just drives deeper immersion. And I think actually lends itself to probably more efficient shooting.
When Dave was mentioning about our use of the game engine for some of the Maze Runner stuff, it's a really interesting field of study that we're doing. And Dave and I work for a gentleman named Ted Galliano, who mentioned is also extremely forward-thinking and almost childlike in our thinking. So it's this very kind of open playground where no one gets dinged for trying new things. And there's an interesting blend point because a lot in the CG world for virtual reality is built on game engine technology, either Unity or Unreal or Crytek are the 3 main game engines that are being used. And for everyone that's concerned about that, we sort of refer back to, remember the moment before Jurassic Park, the first one, a few years back, when people said, there's no way you're going to do this with computers. And then suddenly, there was a way to do it with computers. There were days before Pixar's when people said, there's no way you'll do animation at any real quality with computers. And then there was. So what Dave and I are working on, while still having a very kind of cautious eye to it, we know that not everything can move in this direction. The idea of using a real-time game engine to change some of the economics and some of the delivery times and give the creative artists, like a guy like Wes, who's a very modern director, more tools to use quicker and more efficiently and more creatively, it feels like it's an inevitable drive toward the future, right? That you don't have to look that far in the past to know that there were these moments of concern, and now it's completely mainstream and obvious that you will use computers and these type of pathways to create movie visual effects. In the future, we believe that all that will change again, and everything will become much, much faster to the point where almost everything we do in the world of VFX will be either real-time or close to real-time.
Well, I think that's actually what's probably the most interesting thing about having this mix of people on the panel is that things are actually, as Ted said, they're converging. The work that Escape is doing represents an evolution of the cinema as we know it today into a more immersive act, whereas in virtual reality, of course, by the very nature of virtual reality, it is a deeply immersive act. But a question was raised last year, like, is this move towards virtual reality or augmented reality, is it going to mean the end of cinema? And I think what you're seeing from what Ted's doing and hopefully what we're doing from our side is that the cinema is just going to evolve. The place that you go usually to see Gravity in 4K projection with Atmos sound, you're going because that can be monetized over the crowd. The cost of a $1 million laser projected with a cooling system in another room, accompanied with a huge array of speakers, that's not something the average person can afford in their house. So you go to a place where you can have that experience. And then you think forward about what a cinema will be. Well, it's a place that you go that perhaps, say, the cost of an 8K visor might be $15,000. Now, most people will not buy that for their home, but if you had a place where you could go with 20 of your friends, you could have the latest state-of-the-art 8K visor with a chair that had some form of feedback. You can start to see what that meaning of cinema becomes. You're going there with your friends. You're having an amazing, immersive experience. It's a combination of virtual reality, feedback, and still, like, it's a communal activity. I think that's where you possibly will see cinema going in the next, like, several years.
So, in that case, if we think about the game engine environment where you actually build a whole world that you can move around in, this goes towards the holodeck idea that Arthur mentioned earlier. So if the end game is the holodeck, where you can go around in that environment with people, so you're experiencing things together as an audience, effectively. And where we are right now is, well, if we maybe ignore Escape for a moment, just to say that we have a simple frame and we put the picture in it. Where are we in the journey from that frame to the holodeck?
We're closer than you might think. Within this calendar year or early next calendar year, you're going to have 3 systems on the market that are very holodeck-like. So you're going to have what's called Crescent Bay now from Oculus, which will turn into their first consumer product. You have the Valve Room, which is what's called the Vive headset, which is the partnership with HTC, and you have the Sony Morpheus. They're all tremendously good already. They have not hit the market. We work with all of them at Fox. We test them. You guys work with them. Everybody on this panel has been in them, including Dave has been in the Crescent Bay. And it does give you this sense of presence. You are in another world. You can move around in it, walk around in it, use your hands to experience things, and we're just cutting our teeth on it, right? So what we do is we think, okay, here's where we are today. Imagine where we're going to be in 3 or 4 years. Imagine where we're going to be in 10 years. Now all this stuff is very viable and very cost effective. Virtual reality has been around for quite some time, right? You can actually find touch points to this 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago. But today, the viability of the technology is extraordinarily high, meaning the panels exist, everything is very cheap, computer power is very cheap, and there's an extraordinarily powerful vortex of excitement right now around this medium because people know it's real. They can actually access it, get it. You can get virtual reality today. You can use a Google Cardboard, which is sort of the entry level of virtual reality. You can then move to a Gear VR, which is a big step up from that, and then you can move up eventually, not for very long, another year, less than a year, to having a Vive headset or a Morpheus or a Crescent Bay, and then you're fully inside that world. So we're pretty excited about it.
It's not going to be long before you can rent a movie, a Brad Pitt movie, and he'll be rendered volumetrically for you, and you can choose what size you want to see him at, tabletop size or real size, and you can choose what age you want him to be, probably in his good years. And then, when you interact with him, imagine if he's life-size and you're walking around a room, you're not going to want to walk through him because it's going to spoil the experience, so he's going to step aside. So this thing is going to be driven, it's not going to be recorded per se, it's going to be driven by an AI. And that's sort of a few years in the future, but we're going to go to interactive experiences where we don't know what the outcome is.
But that's not science fiction. We're testing that right now. I'm in labs testing what Arthur's talking about today.
Can I come?
Yes, it's fascinating.
Well, Ted's actually not here right now.
That's right.
But the thing is, but Ted's right. I think, look, it's easy to look at several people up on a stage waxing philosophic about what it will be. But it is really important to understand that this is not a next year, the year after kind of thing. This is happening right now. I think a lot of us on the West Coast are immersed on it such a daily basis that we see how quickly it is moving. It seems like it's really kind of catching its stride on the East Coast as well. But this is something that undeniably is happening. You cannot back away from the fact that Google Cardboard, which really, I think it took a while for people to understand, it's not about a cardboard box, it's about the infrastructure. It's about the ability to run the experience on your phone, powered by the phone. And it's not just the new phones, it's phones that are up to a year and a half old. We deliver our experience directly to those phones and can enable things like Dolby Atmos. Object-oriented playback of audio on your phone, a Nexus 5 that's a year and a half old. So what it means is it's just not about reaching maybe a couple 100,000 people through a tethered device like the Rift or say, Valve and HTC, which are phenomenal devices, but it's going to take a while to hit a mass market, particularly because of cost. But the fact that the people in this room can think about using their existing infrastructure to reach tens, if not 100 million people in the next 3 months is extremely realistic. And if you look at the slope of progress, there's some great charts, and you see it constantly, is that there's a period of very slow incremental growth, and it's very hard to see it. It looks almost like a linear, almost a linear straight line, and then you just hit like these couple milestones where the inflection is dramatic, and you start to see the technology leveraging the thing that just came before at an increasing rate. So it's a big, huge slope upwards, a hockey stick. And I think that's exactly where we are with virtual reality. So, again, the biggest thing to take away from this is that the strides are being made with Barco and Escape. Hopefully what we're doing at Jaunt. And by the way, we're not the only players in virtual reality. There is no one monolithic approach to virtual reality or augmented reality. This is all happening. This is all dramatically important to the industry.
So when we go to the cinema in the future, maybe instead of asking us to switch our phones off, we'll be asked to switch them on, put them in front of our face.
Yeah, for parts of it, yeah. Yeah, we're talking about ideas where you're in the cinema and then there are moments where you actually will go into virtual reality or augmented reality and move in and out of it.
So I think we could spend a whole day at least or more talking about this, but unfortunately time is upon us. So I'd just like to thank the panel, and if you'd like to give them a great round of applause. Thank you very much.